Let me tell you something that still doesn't sit right with me, even now. One ordinary Thursday morning, a man walked into a car rental office near the airport just trying to pick up the SUV he had reserved. 20 minutes later, he was slammed onto a counter, cuffed like a criminal, and shoved into the back of a police car. And the part that really makes people shake their heads when they hear it, that man was an FBI intelligence analyst. Yeah, that actually happened. The whole thing started in one of those bright, sterile rental offices you see everywhere near airports. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, posters on the walls showing winding coastal highways, the faint smell of industrial cleaner hanging in the air. The morning rush had already passed, so the place was quiet. Just a manager behind the counter and one customer standing patiently at the far end. That customer was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was 46, tall, calm, the kind of man who carried himself with quiet confidence. He wore a dark charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. Crisp white shirt, silk tie, tied with the kind of precision that comes from years of discipline. If you passed him on the street, you'd probably think he was a lawyer or a corporate executive. What most people wouldn't guess was that Marcus had spent nearly 2 decades working inside the intelligence community. He had started at the NSA analyzing encrypted communications, the kind of work that involves staring at endless streams of data and spotting patterns most people would never notice. Eventually, the FBI recruited him because he had a reputation for something rare. He could connect dots nobody else even saw. Marcus wasn't the guy kicking in doors with a tactical team. He was the guy who made sure those teams were kicking in the right door. That morning, he was in town for work. A multi-agency investigation involving illegal firearms moving across state lines. His role was coordination and surveillance planning, and the rental SUV he had reserved weeks earlier was part of the operation. So there he was standing at the counter, checking emails on his government phone, waiting for the branch manager to locate the keys. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, just a man waiting. But the manager behind the counter saw something completely different. His name was Brett Sterling, 29 years old, promoted to branch manager a few months earlier because the company was short on staff. He wore the company polo shirt like it was a badge of authority and took his job protecting company assets very seriously. And for some reason, Marcus made him nervous. You know how sometimes people tell themselves a story in their head, and once that story starts growing, it becomes bigger than reality. That's exactly what happened to Sterling. First, he noticed the suit. Then he noticed the expensive credit card Marcus handed him. Then he noticed Marcus calmly typing on his phone. And slowly, piece by piece, Sterling started constructing a fantasy in his mind. Maybe the card was fake. Maybe the reservation was stolen. Maybe the man in the suit wasn't waiting for a car at all. Maybe he was texting accomplices outside. The truth was simple. The credit card authorization had gone through immediately. The SUV Marcus reserved was already cleaned and ready. The keys were sitting in Sterling's pocket. But instead of finishing the rental, Sterling stalled. He told Marcus the system was slow, told him it might take a few minutes. Then he disappeared into the back office and picked up the phone. He didn't call 911 exactly, but he might as well have. "This is the manager at Apex Rentals," he told the dispatcher in a hushed voice. "There's a man here acting aggressive. He's refusing to leave and he's making my staff nervous." None of that was true, but he kept talking. "He's been loitering for half an hour. His card looks fake. I think he might be casing the place for a robbery." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. "Is he armed? Has he threatened anyone?" Sterling said no, but he made sure to include the right buzzwords. Aggressive, refusing to leave, suspicious behavior. That was enough. A patrol unit was dispatched. About 15 minutes later, Officer Derek Vance received the call on his computer terminal while driving nearby. Suspicious person, disturbance, possible trespassing. To Vance, that meant one thing, a confrontation waiting to happen. He was 32 years old and had been on the force about 6 years. In the locker room, some officers called him a hard charger. What that usually meant was he liked being aggressive. He trusted his instincts more than procedure, and those instincts often pointed him toward conflict. So when he pulled into the parking lot of the rental office, he was already expecting trouble. Inside the lobby, Marcus was still standing exactly where he had been before calmly checking his phone. Vance didn't speak to the manager first, didn't ask questions. His eyes locked immediately onto the only black man in the room. He walked straight across the floor and stopped a few feet away. "Hey," he barked, "we need to talk." Marcus looked up slowly and closed his phone. "Officer," he said politely, "is there a problem?" "That depends on you," Vance replied. "Manager says you're causing a disturbance and refusing to leave." Marcus glanced toward the counter. "I haven't been asked to leave," he said calmly. "I'm renting a vehicle. The manager told me the computer system was slow." Vance scoffed. "Well, he called the police, so clearly something's wrong." Marcus kept his voice level. "I have a reservation. I'm simply waiting for the keys." Vance stepped closer, invading his space. "This is private property. If the manager wants you gone, you go. grab your stuff and head outside. Marcus knew the law well enough to understand what was happening. Technically, trespassing requires someone to actually ask you to leave first. Nobody had done that. But arguing legal definitions with an agitated police officer rarely ends well. So Marcus took a breath and tried to de-escalate. "Officer," he said calmly, hands visible on the counter, "I'm a federal employee here on official business. If you'd allow me to show you my credentials." "I didn't ask for your life story," Vance snapped. Marcus nodded slowly. "My identification is in my inner jacket pocket." He began to move his hand toward it, and that's when everything exploded. "Don't reach." Vance lunged forward before Marcus could even finish the motion. He grabbed Marcus's wrist and twisted it violently behind his back, slamming the older man chest first onto the rental counter. The sound of the impact echoed through the lobby. "What are you doing?" Marcus gasped. "Stop resisting," Vance shouted loudly, the words clearly meant for the body camera on his chest. "I'm not resisting," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "You're making a mistake." But the officer wasn't listening. He grabbed Marcus's other arm, yanked it behind his back, and snapped a pair of handcuffs around his wrists, so tight the metal dug into his skin. Two customers who had just walked in froze in the doorway. One of them raised a phone and began recording. Marcus stood slowly as Vance hauled him upright. His glasses were crooked. His suit was rumpled. But his voice was calm, colder than before. "My credentials are in my inner pocket," he said quietly. "You've just assaulted a federal officer." Vance laughed. "Sure you are. I'll verify that downtown." And just like that, Marcus Thorne was marched out of the building and shoved into the back of a patrol car. The ride to the station took about 10 minutes. Marcus didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't argue. He simply sat there in silence, committing every detail to memory. Time, route, officer behavior. You know what I mean. The kind of quiet observation someone in his profession does automatically. Finally, Vance glanced into the rearview mirror. "Pretty quiet back there," he said. "Thinking up a better story than I work for the FBI." Marcus looked at him calmly. "I'm thinking about your pension," he said, "and how fast it's about to disappear." At the station, Vance marched his prisoner straight to the booking desk where Sergeant Thomas Miller was finishing paperwork. Miller was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran of the department. He looked up and immediately noticed something odd. The expensive suit, the calm posture, the fact that the man in cuffs looked more like a federal attorney than a criminal. "What do we have here?" Miller asked. "Trespassing, resisting, and impersonating a federal agent," Vance said proudly. Miller raised an eyebrow and turned to Marcus. "Sir, your name?" "Marcus Thorne," he replied clearly. "Senior Intelligence Analyst, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Vance rolled his eyes. "Sarge, he's full of it." Miller walked around the desk slowly. "May I check your ID?" Marcus nodded toward his jacket. "My credentials are in the inner pocket." Miller reached inside and pulled out a black leather credential case. He opened it. The gold seal of the Department of Justice glinted under the fluorescent lights. For a moment, Miller just stared. Then he slowly turned toward Vance. "Is this the fake ID?" he asked quietly. Vance squinted. "It looks real, but anyone can buy those online." "It's real, you idiot." The sergeant's voice echoed across the room. "You just arrested a federal intelligence officer." 3 seconds later, Miller ran the badge number through the system. The computer screen flashed a restricted access warning confirming the identity and automatically notifying the FBI. "Take those cuffs off him," Miller said. Vance's hands trembled as he unlocked them. Marcus rubbed his wrists, slowly, deep red marks already forming where the metal had bitten into his skin. Then he straightened his tie. "Sergeant," he said calmly, "I need access to a secure phone." Within 45 minutes, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the station. 4 federal agents walked in. Not to arrest anyone, just to pick up their colleague. Meanwhile, back at the rental office, the consequences were arriving just as quickly. Marcus had made one more phone call, to corporate headquarters. By early afternoon, the district manager arrived. Brett Sterling was fired on the spot, escorted out with a cardboard box and instructions not to return. And a few weeks later, the city received something even worse. A lawsuit. Marcus Thorne versus the city of Charlotte. Unlawful arrest. Excessive force. Racial profiling. Civil rights violations. The evidence was overwhelming. The 911 recording showed Sterling had lied. Body camera footage showed the violent arrest. Witness videos captured the entire incident. During discovery, investigators uncovered something even more troubling. Officer Vance already had 7 complaints on record for similar behavior. Profiling. Escalating nonviolent situations. Each complaint had been dismissed. Faced with a public trial that would expose all of it, the city settled. $4.1 million. Vance was fired. His law enforcement certification revoked permanently. And Marcus, he went back to work. Because despite everything, he still believed in the mission. But sometimes he'd look down at the faint scars on his wrists and remember that morning. A man with a top-secret clearance. A man trusted with national security. Reduced in seconds to a suspect because of someone else's assumptions. And that leads to a question people still argue about whenever this story comes up. If Marcus Thorne hadn't had FBI credentials in his pocket, How do you think that situation would have ended? Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you ever witnessed something like this, where someone was judged before anyone bothered to learn the truth? I want to hear your perspective.